Doch, kan je de deur dicht doen? Hello. I'm Kees Christiaanse. I don't see anybody, and I have never given a lecture online in my life. So this is the first time. Let me tell me who I am. I'm sitting here in the city of Zurich in Switzerland, at home, because the internet connection in my home is better than in my office, which is very often so in architecture offices, maybe, as you know. I am 67 years old, and I'm the principal of KCAP Architects, which have offices in Rotterdam, in Zurich, and in Shanghai. And we work primarily internationally. We focus a little bit on Europe traditionally, but we work actually also a lot in Asia and sometimes in other parts of the world. I was 15 years long, I was a professor of urban design at ETH in Zurich. And before that, I was a professor of urban design at the TU in Berlin. And I started my career at the OMA office, which was founded in Rotterdam in the end of the 1970s, early 80s, where I worked for about 8 years before starting my own professional career with KCAP in 1989. So this picture shows you a woman lying in between a lot of smarties. I am always being asked to talk about smart urbanism, and I get really sick of it. Smart urbanism is a little bit like these sweeties, these smarties. They taste very nice, but if you taste too much of them, then you get totally sick of it. And the smart city is an inflationary concept that is probably redundant in the modern times, specifically in the times where we are now, where there is a lot of political turmoil and also a lot of problems in relation to climate and environment, one of which reasons is the COVID pandemic on the moment. That's why we are all sitting at home and trying to learn how to behave in a better way. But like I said before, I don't think there's anything smart about it. If you look at this picture, you see the first concert of the Rolling Stones in the Netherlands in 1964. This concert lasted about 5 minutes, and then it was stopped by the police because the audience started to destroy the chairs. But that's not what I'm talking about. I want to talk about, you see the Rolling Stones with their guitars, their electric guitars, and the approximate total power, electric power necessary for this concert was about 10,000 watts. And during the police intervention, the power of the theater exploded because the whole installation of the Rolling Stones, which only fitted in a Volkswagen van, was too much for the theater. The theater was one of the biggest in the Netherlands. The next slide, you see on the left-hand side, you see 1969, the equipment of Pink Floyd, which all fitted in a big truck, and they needed about 100,000 watts of electric power. And on the right-hand side, you see the private jumbo jet of the band Iron Maiden, which came to Zurich in 2016 to give a concert for about 25,000 people in a big sports hall, where the amount of watts that is necessary to feed their equipment is about more than 1 million. So these three pictures, they simply tell you, you can also take a lot of other examples, that the proliferation of consumption of energy and material, independent of our nice ethics and politics, goes on and on all the time. And this is the real problem of the world, and there's nothing smart about it. These are two graphs from The Guardian, and you see on the right-hand side that we have been producing so many animals in an artificial way, like cattle, that only 4% of the mammals are still wild, and 60% is livestock. 30% of the mammals are humans. These animals produce enormous amounts of methanic gas, which suffocates our environment. And so you see there's a real problem of proliferation, which can only be tackled by behavior and not so much by technology. And on this moment, we live in a situation where there's also a problem with politics and a kind of fallback on patriarchic male chauvinist societies. On this moment, the world is being dominated by people like this, which is a very depressing condition, which also accelerates the non-smartness of our society and the climatal, environmental, and urbanistic problems that we are living. I myself come from the tradition of Provo. The Provo movement from the 1960s till late 1960s was a group of students and artists. They were related to the Fluxus movement in New York, and they tried to open up society in the Netherlands, which at that time was quite hierarchical still. And they were clothed in white clothes. So you see here Lutz Schimmelpenninck, one of the leaders, in white clothes, and they produced white plans. And one of the white plans was the white bicycle plan, which consisted of the idea to paint most of the bicycles in the city white, unlock them, distribute them across the city, and let the people of the city use them for free, and then leave them when they didn't use them anymore. So this idea was started in 1967, and only now, since we have smartphones and since we have monitoring systems in which we can retrace the bikes, it has been implemented about 40 years later. But the original idea started with this Provo movement. They also started to initiate electrical cars as individual public transport in the city of Amsterdam. On the left hand, you see Lutz, the same guy, in a prototype, and on the right hand, you see the real series of electric cars running through the city around 1970. They ran until 1984, and below you see the loading station, the loading dock, where they had to stay at least 24 hours in order to get their unbelievable heavy batteries loaded. But you could take an abonnement, you could be registered and drive with it, and it functioned pretty well, although only for a limited amount of people. It was a very, very avant-garde, ahead of its time, to create all these infrastructures. In that time, John Lennon learned to know Yoko Ono, and they were very impressed by the Provos. They also adopted this white clothing by the Provos, and they even came to Amsterdam to have a sit-in in the Hilton Hotel. And there they were offered one of the bicycles. You see on the right hand below, you see Lutz Schimmelpenninck today. He is 75 years old, something like that. And he is still working on urban mobility. He is the founder of Car2Go, which is now a smart car system that you can use in quite some European cities on the moment. And on the top, you see Zero Bike, which is a Chinese Singaporean company who started to throw bikes all around the city, which at the same time shows the problem of these cheap bikes that everybody can use for almost nothing. They become very easily litter in public space instead of practical mobility devices. This is the I-Plan in Amsterdam. This was my very first project when I was working at OMA. It was also the commission that was the reason to start OMA in Amsterdam, in Rotterdam. You see that it is a flat garden city development right opposite the central station in Amsterdam. So right in the middle of the center of Amsterdam. This would today not be possible anymore. Today there would be 150 meter high towers, high density, luxury promenades, yacht harbors and marinas, etc. But at that time, there was still a kind of dictatorship of the residents of Amsterdam over the space of the city. And the people who are living around it, they were demanding social housing. So the whole project consists of 1,500 social housing units in low rise. The highest floor is 4th floor, and it includes school, children's gardens, shopping, etc. It was also the first project in the Netherlands where so-called urban villas were built. You see them here in the front. They are compact buildings with something like 20 apartments. Originally, a typology emerged in Italy and in Germany and imported to the Netherlands by us in the early 80s, which became so popular that half of the Netherlands now is being constructed with these urban villas. We are still, this was 1980, we are still building in the same area around the harbor of Amsterdam. So it's now about 40 years later. And 40 years later, we are still constructing with different techniques and different typologies. But still, we are doing a lot of housing. And this is one of the latest buildings that we are now constructing, about 500 meters from the previous site. The most famous project in this typology, maybe in Amsterdam, is the GWL, the waterworks site in Amsterdam, which we built, I guess, around between 1995 and 2000. And this project, as you can see, consists of a wall around it, which protects the site against noise of the harbor and traffic and industry. And then it creates a kind of quiet zone in which there are these urban villas, which have a specific typology, because despite the fact that they are all having 25 apartments, most of the dwellings have their front door on the ground floor. So they are very strange typologies. It's a kind of Dutch disease that everybody would like to live on the ground, or at least have his own front door on the ground. So there are a lot of staircases in these buildings that are circling on top of each other. Another feature is that in between, we do not have public space, but we have parceled the land into allotments, into small gardens for the residents, where they grow vegetables and where they meet. And it's a typical principle that we developed, that living rooms have their own garden in front of it. The front doors are coming out on the grade level, and people have their own vegetable gardens, so that social control is very strong. And it also is expressed in the fact that there is much less vandalism in the area than anywhere else. And the social cohesion between the community of residents in this neighborhood is the highest in Amsterdam. This is a principle that, of course, was already described by Jane Jacobs in the 1950s in her famous book, The Death and Life of American Cities. I knew Jane Jacobs. I met her a couple of times. We were together in juries and so on. So you see us here in 1991 in Toronto. And she has been one of my important inspirations and also basis for the methodology of design and the way that the typologies, urban typologies and building typologies that we do are being developed. One of the most significant concepts that we developed and that were put into an exhibition in the Biennale in Rotterdam in 2009 was called Open City. The name already says it, a city that is open and not closed and is not gated. The theme highlights the fact that by means of urban structure, you can create a more or less open city. You see this in these two diagrams. The upper diagram on the right shows the traditional city from the 1950s and 60s that were both being constructed in the west and in the east, consisting of monofunctional housing, neighborhoods, motorways that are separated, and neighborhoods that only have single access and do not really communicate with each other and do not have any mix. While the lower diagram is more or less a representation of a 19th century inner European city, in which you can see that a gridded street pattern with a width of about 200 meters maximum, and certain block typologies produce the possibility to create communities with mixed use in the city scape, which produces cultural quality, economic growth, mutual tolerance, etc. You see also that those neighborhoods anywhere in the world, from the French Concession in Shanghai to Greenwich Village in New York or the Pipe in Amsterdam, are the most popular neighborhoods where specifically creative people would like to live and work. We developed also because of the importance of social cohesion and social participation, and the tradition in the Netherlands of residential participation in project development. We developed the design method or a process management method called Simultaneous Chess, which is simply that you, if you look at the right list, the list on the left side, inventarization, analysis, interpretation, vision, etc. Normally in a design process, all these aspects are more or less linearly behind each other. So you have a phase and then you go into the next phase and then you go in the next phase. But we are working simultaneously on all these things. So we start immediately to design. Before we know the site, we start to analysis. Before we have been to the site, we start to collect possible typologies and elaborate all these aspects at the same time. We also start immediately to talk to the people that live around the site or that are allocated to become participants in the process, so that the whole process is being pushed forward with simultaneous streams of work. The advantage is that the work goes faster, that you have always support from the stakeholders, at least for the most cases, that you are more efficient, you get better ideas because you work in a more integrated way, and the result is also better quality. So it's a very difficult way of working, but as soon as you get a little bit experience in it, then it works quite smooth. I think this process and the whole process of urban design is extremely dependent on experience. Probably that's also why urban designers are mostly old men like me, and not so young when they get big projects, at least. Here you see a picture of how we work in this kind of processes. So this is a block in Rotterdam, a housing block. In the old days, we would just design the whole housing block, and the people around it would start living in it. They would get an apartment or so, and then they would start living in it. But this is working different. So here the plots are being sold to people, and the people who buy it, they can bring their own architect. And we, as the urban designers and the architectural supervisors, we develop the rules and the technology principle according to which the houses are built. So you have, on the one hand, you have a strong coordination to create a project together. And on the other hand, you have the possibility for people to create very individual structures. And what also is a big advantage is that the whole legislative approval process and also the budget control is much easier than when people build individual houses. So here you see the first houses being ready. And so we coordinate between the architects, which are sometimes one-man offices or young starters. We coach them to build in this integrated whole of a perimeter block. And the result is a kind of typological diversity, but also a social diversity, because there are different people in being interested in living and working here. Of course, we work with co-working spaces. Houses are not anymore exclusively meant for living, but also should also have the opportunity to allow for work and home office, specifically in the times that we are in now. So a result of this culture, it's a bit of a Dutch specific culture, is this kind of diversity, which some people find a terrible mess, and other people find a fantastic collection of anarchistic architectures. I think it really doesn't matter so much, but it is very clearly, obviously, an expression of a very decentralized democratic society, where the diversity is going down to the one unit of the household instead of in larger groups. So I think it is a very interesting phenomenon, and we are also working in that. And therefore, our office is also organized like that. So most architecture offices are like in the left picture. It's just one big ship with a captain. But our office is just something like 20 ships or 30 ships with 30 captains that are coordinating with each other. And they form a kind of swarm that together sails into one direction. And I also enjoy this very much more than being a single boss over a whole group of people. The idea of our office is not only to create perfect designs, which we not always do, of course, but primarily also to create a kind of community, an exemplary community of design people that are active in society. This is also the reason that we work a lot with conversion of former industrial sites and port sites, like here in the harbor of Amsterdam. I wrote a book which is called City as Loft, which is about this type of project. They are projects where we worked more like a kind of impresario or like a kind of theater director or a music conductor than as designers, because we try to preserve as many qualitative buildings as possible. We try to get the squatters and the artists and the students that have been invading these areas into a framework in which many of them can stay, while in empty spots new buildings can be made that kind of produce the budget and the money to help establish this cultural quality in the site. And you see here, you see two examples which are actually complementary. So on the left hand, you see an old factory hall in which many artists have their self-made studio. It's like a mini city under a glass industrial roof. So these people are pioneers. They are low budget, but sometimes they get successful as startups, and then they become high budget and they become very rich, and they start to rent big real estate or build buildings. And on the right-hand side, you see a hotel that has been built next to that hall. It's a DoubleTree hotel, which is a kind of low-budget branch of Hilton. And this is a typical example of what I call low-budget, high culture in combination with high-budget, low culture. So in the past, the people with money, they were, let's say, the enemies of the creative people. And in the port cities of the big cities in Europe and Eastern America, there has been a reconciliation between capital and creativity, which leads to a very exciting potential of urban development, which is beneficial for most of the parties. So here you see another example where we built new buildings on top of existing warehouses along the harbor in Amsterdam, which generates a lot of density and a lot of luxury square meters that can be sold or rented out to powerful people, whereas the warehouses contain cultural institutions that cannot pay a lot of rent. And so you have a kind of complementary activity. I see somebody in the picture. I don't know what that means, but I just go on. Here you see the same project, and you see this warehouse in the front, the Zwijger. It's one of the cultural hotspots of Amsterdam, where there are concerts, there are exhibitions, there is a cafeteria, there is conferences. And on the other side, you see a new building that we built on top of it, which contains luxury housing. It works all quite well. And in the basement, we had a restaurant founded by Jamie Oliver. You see him on the left side. It's unfortunately, it is bankrupt now, but this restaurant was founded by Jamie Oliver. It was called 15 in order to produce food by ex-criminal young people that are reintegrated into society. So the interesting thing about this restaurant was that when you go there for lunch, you would see a powerful capitalist manager eating his lunch and served by an ex-criminal youth in a building that is used for cultural facilities. And that's, of course, the best reconciliation of classes that you can have in the city. This is the center of Rotterdam. And what you see is a couple of towers in the front, which is the Wijnhaven triangle area. And you see a red tower. This red tower has been built by us. And we also did the urban design. And the urban design is very interesting because you see that all the towers are standing on top of existing building blocks. It is a rule-based urban design in which we allowed individual owners of buildings and plots to create towers in order to earn money, in order to renovate the sokels, the podiums, or the old buildings, and in order to create urban functions in the plinth along the street, and more housing in an area where there were mostly offices. And it was not possible to do this without building towers, because without building towers, you would not have enough building volume in order to change the office buildings in the lower area. We did not define where the towers were or what they will look like. We made a kind of game out of it. It's a very old game. It was already designed in 1991. Here you see the existing triangle with 1950s office buildings. They were half empty, they were derelict. And here you see the principle of gradual increase of density by building towers. And these towers had to behave themselves according to certain rules so that they would not hinder themselves, they would not spoil each other's view, and they would not cast too much shadows on their neighbors. So there was a whole set of rules which would lead to the situation that when you would build, you would not build the left tower, because you would build a fat tower with a lot of apartments on the north without sun and view. And you would not build the tower on the right, because that would be very expensive and have mainly staircase pipes and a little bit of space for apartments. So you would be somewhere in the middle. So this regulation more or less mediated automatically what would be the result of the buildings. And here you see what is going on now. In the meantime, there are even more towers that are under construction, and it's extremely successful. But what is actually the most important merit of the project is that it gets people back into the city center, because they are all apartments. And the buildings have grade level, street level areas where gradually restaurants, galleries, and so are settling down in an area that used to be relatively empty. And so it is. It's quite an important piece of urban renewal in social sense, apart from the exciting skyline that is being generated. So this is the tower we build ourselves. It's a podium with offices and shops and galleries and a hotel. And then on top of it are two housing volumes, one tower and one block that is cantilevering across the water. On the other side of the water, you see the Art Academy that we also constructed, but I won't talk about it today. And here you see the lobby of the complex, which is a beautifully sculptured space. And the woman in there is my mother. And here you see one of the top apartments. And the left person is one of my partners of my office, KCAP. And we have he has an art gallery in his apartment. So it's the highest art gallery in the Netherlands. It's on the 37th floor, and we have a lot of meetings also in this apartment with our clients, overlooking the river. Maas in Rotterdam. Here you see a kind of overview of towers that are still under construction. And we have had a fight with the city. So you can see that an urban designer only has a limited influence on his city or on any city. After a while, something else happens, and then your concept is being lost, because the front towers that you see along the water do not comply with the rules. You see that they are much fatter. This is a mistake by the local government of the city, and the result is that a lot of the slender towers in the middle will lack a view to the river, which was not the idea of the original urban design, but we cannot do anything about it. So this principle of densification as a kind of means to create money, to create more mixed use and more urban value and more social exchange, we have been applying in other cities. This is the railway station, main railway station in Zurich. And on the other side of the tracks, you see a whole development, which was designed a little bit according to the same principle. Here you see an impression of the central space, the so-called Europa Allee. You know that Switzerland does not belong to Europe, but it's still called the Europa Allee. And it's a conical space in which building blocks are built. And these building blocks, again, they are about 20 meters high, but above 20 meters, they may have a certain volume as long as they do not hinder other buildings. On this moment, the project is almost ready. And this is a picture of all the KCAP people, all the people of my office, about 120 people that recently visited the site in Zurich. We do a kind of social event and excursion once a year with all people of our office. And you see that the space is becoming quite intimate and quite urban, and the density does the city very, very well. Here you see the model, and you see that the principle is consisting of blocks, and most of the blocks, they have two little towers on top of them. This was started in a competition by one architecture office, Caruso St. John. And then in the next competitions, this was taken over by other architects, and it creates quite an interesting harmony between the different building blocks. We apply here a principle of subtraction, which you see symbolized by this picture, this dynamic picture. So what we do when we build in such an area, we do not, like a traditional classical architect, look what kind of beautiful architectural sculpture we can make there, what is the maximum height that we can do there, etc. No, we are filling the site like a big chunk of cheese up to 120 meters full, and then we start cutting out the public space. Then we start cutting out the planes that produce too much shadow, and at last we are cutting out the view lines that we want to have in the area. And then the residual envelopes are the maximum building parameters for the buildings of the blocks that are going to be constructed. So you can clearly see that in this model. So the wireframe that you see is the maximum building envelope, and the colored volumes inside the wireframe are the actual buildings that can be very different and very diverse, as long as they meet the regulations that we have been imposing. It leads to a much more creative urbanism. It also leads to a much better profitability of the buildings for the investors. And it also enables a much better division of programming than the traditional way of urban design. This is one of the buildings, one of the first ones. It is a building by Caruso St. John Architects, and the grade level is public space, restaurants, shops. The podium up to the 20-meter line is offices, and the two volumes that are crowning it are two small apartment towers. So you have a kind of integrated mixed use within the buildings as well. You see some other buildings that have adopted the same program, and you see here the central square of the area, which was going to be called the Le Corbusier Square, but then the socialist green government of Zurich discovered that Le Corbusier had been a Nazi sympathisant, and then the naming of the square was dismissed. I don't know what it is called now. Here you see another building, this building is very interesting because we had a lot of protests from local people and specifically also younger, creative, green and left-wing people against this project, because they were saying this is only investment construction, which it is not, because it has about 60% housing in it. It has cinemas, it has a hotel, it has shops, it has cultural institutions, etc. And they try to prevent this project by a referendum. A referendum is possible in Switzerland. If you collect a certain number of signatures, then you can collect that, and then you go voting. And when the voting is over 50%, then a project is accepted or is dismissed, and then the project just is dropped. So they did that, but we had a 55% majority for this project, so it was constructed in the end. And what is ironical and funny, and which I think is a proof of the quality of the urban design, is that on the edge of the creative neighborhood next door, this block has been built, and it houses an organization called Cosmos. And Cosmos is a kind of young green avant-garde organization with a bookshop, a library, theaters, restaurants, etc. And this Cosmos place has become the hotspot for all the people who were protesting against this project. So the people who protested against this project are now important users of the project itself, which is the biggest compliment that you can get as an urban designer. Another interesting aspect of this project is that on a certain moment, the residual building, office building spaces were all rented by Google. So if you see in this model, you see the blue volume. Everything which is blue has been rented by Google, which is quite interesting because normally these high-tech firms would have a campus in Palo Alto or anywhere else where they are in the middle of nowhere. They need buses and cars to get the people to their campus. The campuses are gated. You do not get into it. There's no interaction with the city, etc. And Google was one of the first tech programs. Now also Drop-off and other companies are following this principle to say this is not good. We have to go back into the city, like also industrial manufacturing is gradually becoming clean and returning to the city. And so Google went here, and they of course asked, the first thing they asked was, can we make bridges between the buildings so that we can interconnect all the buildings? And we said no, you can, we are happy if you come here, but you have to have lobbies and staircases and elevators, and you go from one building into the other by public space, so that you activate public space, and around your entry lobbies there will be a restaurant or a coffee shop where your employees will sit and will develop also their IDs, so that you will contribute to the social machine of the inner city. And so they accepted this, and it's quite successful. Of course, after a while, they closed their lobbies for security reasons. So you can go into some lobbies, but you cannot go further, which is a pity. But in the end, it's a very interesting development, and also a paradigm shift of the eccentrical settlement of high-tech firms, like this one. This is the Apple campus, somewhere near Palo Alto, designed by Norman Foster. And it's a symbol of its own closeness. You see that it is a closed ring, so it is totally gated. You can only get there by car, not by public transport. They have to organize their own bus system. It is, let's say, as close as the Apple operating system, which also doesn't allow any multiple use by other softwares, which I think it looks like a flying saucer, like a UFO, utterly modern, but I think it is utterly old-fashioned, and I think the modernity is more to be found in this kind of development that we did with the center of Zurich. So you can see that we work a lot in railway station areas also. And that is not for nothing, because we are one of the drivers of the so-called TOD, transit-oriented development, which simply acknowledges that public transport is the most important driver of communication and of economic development today, and therefore public transport should be stimulated as much as possible, also cargo by public transport. And railway stations should be hubs in which different mobility forms should connect to each other. And therefore, they should also accommodate high-density developments where mixed use, living, working, entertainment, etc., are being close together, so that they form mobility nodes between other railway station areas, and therefore also reduce the nuisance of the countryside and the use of the overuse of cars and so on. So we are developing the railway station area of the city of Eindhoven, which is one of the bigger cities in the Netherlands. It is about, I would say, it's about 600,000 residents. It's an important city because it used to be the hometown of Philips, and Philips was the most important multinational in electronics in the Netherlands, like Sony in Japan, in the 1950s and 60s, and still is very important. And Philips generated a lot of spin-offs, which now are software companies or companies that produce highly fine mechanical equipment for medical equipment and so on. And this is the base of the economy of Eindhoven. It also has a technical university, also an architecture faculty. And therefore it is growing, and we are working on this railway station area to kind of equip the city for a future density. This is more or less the area. You see the big line, the big white line, which is the area, and the dotted line is the center. And on the top right, you see TUE, which is the technical university in the area. So this is the vision that we have been developed. It's an enormous project. It's much bigger than the Zurich project. It's about 5 times bigger than the Zurich project. And you can see the difference in this slide. The top is the existing situation, which is quite extensively built with the wide 1960s motorways and so on. A lot of green in between where which nobody uses. A very unattractive piece of city. And in the lower area, you see that we more or less occupy all this empty space with new blocks and also allow the blocks to develop high rises as long as in the previous project. They do not hinder each other. So here you see the build. This is a picture that is a little bit distorted, but what I wanted to say is 85% of the area is now non-built, and 33% is traffic infrastructure. So it looks like this in the top. The main boulevard is 107 meters. It's a little bit like the boulevards in Moscow, the kind of idiotic Soviet traffic arteries where no cars are running, that are so far away that you can hardly see the buildings on the other side of the street, like the Karl Marx Allee in Berlin, for instance, East Berlin. And we are going to reduce the main boulevard from 107 meters to 40 meters. So we gain 60 meters of developable land for free. It is city land. So it's a gold mine for the city. I'm sure in Kiev you have the same situation. You can take away a lot of road system, turn it into urban development, and everybody will benefit from it. And you will also be able to finance it because it is land that previously did not exist as commercial surface. So here you see this whole area, including a park and a river. And we create a very fine-mazed pedestrian system. We create on 2 sides of the railway station, we create new railway squares with bus stations underneath, with a lot of bicycle storage for biking and e-biking, which is becoming extremely popular in the Netherlands. It was already popular, but it becomes more popular even. And here you see a model that we use together with the city and the architects that are building their projects to gradually materialize the project. It's a very exciting piece of work. You see a section through the railway, through the passage underneath the railway, which has also been renewed and is a beautiful, generous shopping passage. The bus station and the real estate around it. You see the station square and the boulevard, which has been reduced to 70 meters, to 40 meters. And here you see the whole scheme in its diversity. So the city actually gets a whole new neighborhood, which largely can be financed due to this empty land, which has a lot of connectivity, activated connectivity between the north and the south part of the city, which didn't exist before, by these yellow lines, where there are a lot of mixed-use grade level activities. And it has a beautiful new park and river, also as a result of taking away road lanes between the railway station and the university in the top right corner. We also create a new entrance to the railway station near the river, so that directly from the university the students can step into the train. You see a picture here. Now there's a very ugly little hole where the river goes underneath the railway, and in the future we will open it up make it green, renaturate the river and its flows, and then create an entrance to the railway station from this site. And then it will look hopefully something like this. We are working with a development framework where we have the owners and the new plots being into one development stream. So successively we are phasing this project and gradually implementing. And we have the same kind of rules that I showed you in Zurich, that I showed you in Rotterdam for the built environment, for the building blocks, so that they can develop maximum density against a good situation in terms of environment, wind, shadow, sunlight, and view. So here you see the skyline, and the gray towers that you see are either existing or already approved for development. And the yellow towers are potential towers, because we do not exactly say where they are going to be. That's up to the different competitions and architects. That can be realized within the rules, the urban rules that we state. And here you see a little diagram of the rule-based development. So this is a section through one block. So you see a double story, which is called the urban layer, in which open activities on street level in two levels are being realized. Then you see the purple, the dark purple zone, which is basically offices, co-working spaces, etc. And then you see the other colors. They are related to different height regimes from the past in the city of Eindhoven. So there are quite some buildings that are 75 meters high, and there are quite some buildings that are around 35, 40 meters high. So we also want to express this tradition into the blocks, and then we allow also to go much higher, up to a height of approximately 150 meters. Here you see the principle of how that works, and all the development obviously has to develop courtyards that are semi-public, so that also in the courtyards activities can be developed. This is then an impression of the boulevard of 70 meters wide. It's about the same width of as the Champs-Élysées in Paris, who is actually something like 69 meters. So now the first developers and the first architects are coming. So these three towers that you see is one of the first projects. The left tower has already been built, the square tower, directly next to the old railway station. Here you see a model of that project in the wind tunnel. It's very important. You see that the towers are kind of becoming broader in the socle, in the podium. This is to increase the surface, so that accessibility is directly from the street to the larger surfaces. But it is also a device to create a better wind condition. So these towers normally would have, if they would have the same section from top to bottom, they would have an enormous amount of wind production. But by means of these feet, let's say they look like large boots, they get quite a favorable wind climate. And you see that around it, we are creating a new railway station square on the center side. Here you see the main throughway through this area, and you see the step downs of these buildings. And in the end of this axis, you see the first Philips building, the first big industrial Philips building, which was built by architect Rosenberg in relation, in reference to the Sullivan's industrial architect in Chicago. And this Mr. Rosenberg, he was the grandfather of Rem Koolhaas. So you can see a little bit where the family tradition of this architect comes from. This is the other side. So you see on the left side, you see the towers I just showed you. In the front, you see a pop concert building designed by MVRDV. And these black buildings we just approved, and they are just starting to go under construction. You see, by the way, on the right-hand side, you see the river running under the railway, but the hole underneath is still very, very tight. And you see that we are working on other buildings around it. This is a very interesting building for a telecom company, which has a very specific energy label system and a specific materialization. The biggest railway station project that we have been ever doing, and probably will be ever doing, is the Jerome Lake District in Singapore. This is a project of about 4 million square meters of mixed-use development with an underground railway station. It was an international competition that we won, and we have been creating the master plan in the past couple of years. It is now resting because of the Corona crisis, but it will be probably taken up later for further development. And the principle is that everything that I told you before, all those principles have been returning in this project, only in a very big scale. So the minimum height of towers here is 130 meters. And we didn't allow for a Dubai skyline. We said, okay, if that is the case, then every tower is going to be 130 meters and every roof has to be flat and has to have a roof garden, so that from far away you will see a neighborhood that consists of one big plane in the air of roof gardens. This is possible in the tropical climate, where you can really grow very large vegetation elements on the roofs of buildings. You can see it in a minute in other pictures that I show you. And what the idea behind it is that we create blocks that are so unbelievably dense that we free up an enormous amount of public space, so that the built footprint of the neighborhood is very low. And therefore the amount of public space and park, which is extremely important in countries like Singapore, where you have this tropical climate, is maximized. So more than 50%, I think even over 60% of the surface of the neighborhood is made out of green. Here you see that we have a whole principle of water management and energy management. Let's say the water management is on this moment not anymore very special, because many people are starting to do it. But the time when we developed it for these large-scale neighborhoods, it was quite special. You see that the water on the roof terraces is being absorbed by the green. Then the water flow is delayed because it either is evaporating due to the temperature or it is being used by the plants. So there's little water coming down. The evaporation leads also to helping the buildings cool, because buildings in tropical climate have to be cooled, and it costs much more energy than heating in our countries. And then the water gradually flows down, and the surface of the district, like I said before, is over 60% of green, so that the whole area becomes a big water absorbing area, and the pavement surface is relatively modest. And so for every aspect also of solar energy, natural ventilation, we have these kind of sustainable principles in combination also with what the Singaporeans call smart infrastructure, which I call intelligent in infrastructure, because I don't want to use the word smart, which is, let's say, integrated district cooling instead of everybody having his own cooling unit, etc. So it's in the middle of Singapore. You see the light blue spot a little bit to the left of the center, where there's a river coming down. That's the area where it is. And it is becoming one of the 3 new centers of Singapore. Up to now, Singapore has only one center, which is in the middle down, but it is going to be decentralized in order to create less mobility problems and evenly divide central functions across the island. There will be 4 bigger towns, of one which is this one, that all will be having a perfect connectivity with public transport. And here you see the overview. The big central park in the middle with the sinus form and the triangular roof, that is the railway station. The railway station is up to 30 meters underground. It contains also all the buses parking that drive down from outside the neighborhood, all the logistics underneath the park, so that there is no public space being disturbed by logistics and traffic, and the park system is kept to a maximum. And you see that you see those 3 islands. Originally, the idea of the urban design authorities was to construct also on these islands, but we said no, we want to spare those islands, and we concentrate the buildings in a very, very high density, so that the islands become green, the shores of the lake become green, and also the big central park underneath the railway station becomes green. So here you see the basic section of how this neighborhood works. You see the streets. The streets are quite narrow. This is necessary in order to prevent sun to go into the streets, so that there is enough shade. In the tropical climate, contrary to in Switzerland or Holland, we don't want to have sun. We want to have shade, because the sun is so extremely hot. And therefore, we create streets that are all in the direction of the wind, of the prevailing wind, so that there is a kind of Venturi effect of natural ventilation in the streets, and they are narrow in order to provide shade. You see also the railway station on the left in the section. And then you see that the buildings form a basic podium of something like 10 stories. Then they have a green deck, which is also partly publicly accessible. And you can walk across the roof from the one block to the other block. And then the towers are starting. And as I said before, instead of in Dubai or in Hong Kong or in Shanghai, all the towers have to be the same height. They have to be flat roofs, and they have to have a roof garden on top, like you see in the top image of this slide. Also here we work with the rules. So what you see is only an impression of the character of the urban design, but not the specific buildings, because the buildings and the blocks will be designed by investors and architects that have to follow the rules, and then are being coordinated and coached by us to build their project. The roads, as I said, they are narrow. They also have a flexible profile, so that they can gradually adapt to the development of smart mobility, of intelligent mobility, sorry. So it starts in the beginning with cars and public transport by buses, because there are no rail connections yet. So then you see the top section, but gradually during the development of the area, they will turn into free bus lanes or pod lanes, and then bicycle roads, and then there will be more and more space for pedestrians. So the profiles of the roads, of the streets, are basically adaptable to the mobility situation in the district over time. You see an impression of the spatial character of the area, and I think although the buildings are quite high and the streets are narrow, it creates a rather generous spatial impression. We also cover the motorway that runs across the area. So here you are walking on top of the motorway, which creates also a lot of additional public space and real estate, and therefore the calculation of the financing of covering the motorway has been positive, and this is going to be done. This cover will also contain a lot of water absorption system. So that's the Jerome Lake District, and you see here a couple of impressions of partly also interior streets that all have natural ventilation systems in which by the form of the buildings and the form of the roofs, the airflow is being stimulated, and therefore air conditioning is less necessary, while at the same time in the floors and in the facades, pipes with cold water are streaming in order to keep the facades a little bit cooler than the environment. And here you see the underground railway station embedded in between the buildings. And here you see the railway station square from inside. And here you see recent buildings in Singapore that show that they have a kind of development of a new typology, a typology which indeed creates multiple levels between buildings, multiple levels that are greened and that are used for water management and rainwater catchment, that are helping also the buildings cool, and that provide the residents and the users of those buildings with attractive public spaces in the higher levels of the buildings, so that they don't always have to go down. Of course, this is a very specific quality of Singapore, or of it is also apt for cities like Hong Kong or Jakarta or Burma or Bangkok, sorry. This principle, of course, does not work in a moderate climate in Kiev or in Zurich. Here you see some real examples of the planting on higher levels. On the left-hand side, you see the campus of our ETH Zurich Research Institute that we have in Singapore since 10 years, which is called Future Cities Laboratory, and in which we do a lot of research into urbanization in tropical and developing countries in Southeast Asia. Another image of course, this is not architecture. This is just an impression of volumes. The architecture that you see is generated by a small software that we have. So we have a kind of software in which when we draw volumes, we can automatically differentiate it with different facades and so on, which is very handy because you can work much quicker. And this is a typical block in the Jerome Lake District, which shows that it is not closed, but it's open, because we want to have courtyards that are activated. And above all, we want to have the spaces naturally ventilated and not covered and be air conditioned. So this is the kind of character that will be hopefully realized in this Jerome Lake District. And here you see the existing situation with the motorway below and the peninsula still connected. And here you see the developed area where the motorway is covered. There's a connectivity to the sea of public space, and you see that the islands are detached from the mainland. Yes, so that was Jerome Lake District. And I would like to finish with continuing on water, because we are increasingly working with water, which is also, of course, natural for us as Dutchmen. And we are also exporting our knowledge with water to other countries, among others to the city of Shenzhen, which you see here, which is one of the biggest cities in the world. It's about 45 kilometers long and about 35 kilometers wide. And you see that it has a lot of hills or even mountains. Sometimes they are about almost 1,000 meters high. And in these mountains, they have created over time a lot of reservoirs, the blue ones, which are the original drinking water reservoirs. And of course, they are partly old and not usable anymore. And we are creating a concept of how to use these reservoirs for public space, but also for water management and stormwater catchment and runoff in the city, and also how to reopen the rivers in the city of Shenzhen and the streets to have the rivers on the surface again, have them natural again, let them evaporate the water and create a better climate for the city. So one of the projects is the central streets in Futian, the center of Shenzhen, which is this one. We do a little bit the same as in the city of Eindhoven. You have enormous motorways, like you see here, with a lot of green where nobody goes. And you have an enormous potential of development, and at the same time there is a need to recreate better green, environmental green, and better water management. So we are working on a lot of exemplary road crossings sections. This is one, for instance, where you see the existing situation, and you see the future situation, where you see that we take away the motorway, we make normal urban streets out of them, we introduce surface water again of the river that is in pipes underneath the streets, and create a park that is accessible for residents on the spot where the motorway was. But at the same time, we add built volume, which can then also partly pay for the investment in the public infrastructure. So this is the Shenan Boulevard, which is the main street of Shenzhen. Not so very attractive, of course, to have a main street consisting of 10 motor lanes. And this is a little bit the situation graphically represented on the moment. And what we are doing is turning it into a park, creating water, reducing the size of the lanes, partly lay the motorway under the street, etc. And then you get a kind of condition like you have in Central Park in New York, for instance. The same we do with the edge of the city to the bay of the Pearl River Delta, where there's used to be a lot of mangroves, these very important natural trees that stand in the water with their roots. So we recreate this kind of condition and give the street and the city a clear edge, so that this can be used both for environmental and climate mitigation, as well as for public space and leisure. This has led to a project where we were asked to do many of these reservoirs. So we are working on a concept how the reservoirs can be put into a different concept of either a center loop of reservoirs or a green archipelago of reservoirs, or a nature U where there's a lot of mountains and forests. And so what we basically do is we take the mountain, we take the reservoir, we take the rivers that are mostly under the streets, and we open up everything. We create conditions in which the rainwater runoff and the sewer system of the districts around the areas are being connected to this. Purification plants are also reconnected to this system, so that an integrated water management system for the whole city can be created and gradually adapted. You see an impression of one of those reservoirs. So you see they are enormous. The mountains are very high. They're beautiful natural areas, but nobody can go there because they're all fenced off. They have been neglected. The landscape is rotten. So it's an enormous reconstruction task that we are working on, creating purifying wetland pockets in between to purify the water that is too polluted, looking at the fauna and flora, type of vegetation, animals. We have biodiversity and hydrologists in the team that work with us in order to create a water and ecological analysis. And this is an image how one of those rivers looks before and after. The top section, you see everything is concrete and stone, and on the lower one, you see that we completely regreen the shore of that river. And the last project is maybe the most spectacular. There's a peninsula on the east of Shenzhen into the Chinese Sea, east of Hong Kong, which is an important holiday resort for the people from Hong Kong and Shenzhen. But there is a lot of typhoons and a lot of, there's also a danger of tsunamis. And so we have won a competition to create the shoreline of about 80 kilometers long, to create a concept of combined landscape and public space design and stormwater protection. So this project is now under construction. So you see here, this is the principle. So you have from the mountains, you have extreme rainfall. You have from the sea, you have high tide and storm. Normally you had mangroves and you had forests, but now you have urban development and you have dikes. And these cannot really properly protect the areas against the water. We have to take into account sea level raising, etc. So, and also the high concrete constructions that are necessary to protect are generally very ugly. So we have been creating a system of terraces, of boulevards, of public spaces, of jetties, of dams, of dikes, of basins, of wetlands that can absorb stormwater from two sides and at the same time create a quality environment. And you see here the first pictures of a realized section. So it's 80 kilometers long. So they are only having 5 kilometers done on the moment. But this is the first impression of the project. And you see that people are already invading this area. It works very, very well. People are very enthusiastic. We have used very sustainable and tactile materials. We do not take any trees away, as you can see. We also do not touch the kind of rocky elements. We integrate it all into the public space design. But you see, for instance, on the right side, you see two people sitting on a bench with a lean in the back. But the lean in the back is, for instance, one part of the sea protection wall that is built in terraces so that it is an attractive landscape landscape urbanist project. So if you want to read a little bit more about our projects, there are, I showed you this book, City is Loved, before. We also have just released a book, The Grand Projet, which is about urban mega projects like railway station areas. And then we have 3 other books, a textbook with text on urbanism, the Potato Plan collection with plans of and analysis of 40 cities in the world, and the Noise Landscape, which is about urbanization around airports. So I hope you have an impression of our work, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you very much. So who is going to pose the questions? Are they going to be written down, or is somebody spelling them? I will switch back to the video. I cannot read anything. Sorry, I cannot see the questions. I think somebody has to talk to me in a discussion to answer the questions, because I cannot read them.